advisor, the science advisor for the Conservation Lands Network, and on behalf of Together Bay Area, which is the sponsor, the host of the Conservation Lands Network, I want to welcome you all to this webinar. We have 1 hour together, and the purpose of this webinar is to basically get under the hood of this very large kind of repository of regional data that's tailored for conservation applications. Let's see here. I'm getting a notice that folks can only see me, not hear me.
Nope, you're
I'm
good.
sorry, hear me, not. Oh, got it. Okay, thanks, Annie. Appreciate that. So yeah, welcome everybody, and thanks for being here. We're about to get under the hood of the Conservation Lands Network. We've structured this to where if you're brand new to the Conservation Lands Network, we're going to give you a primer. But right off the bat, I just kind of need to warn you a little bit that quite a lot went into the development of the Conservation Lands Network. And we could, and we have, spent an hour talking about the process to develop the Conservation Lands Network. And those presentations by myself and Stu Weiss are actually on Together Bay Area's website. So I kind of encourage you to kind of fill in any information about the kind of the underpinnings of the Conservation Lands Network after this. But for folks who are not new to the Conservation Lands Network, we're going to get into two main pieces of the Conservation Lands Network: the online kind of dynamic interactive map, and then the conservation portfolio reports that you can create with your own area of interest. And so I was trying to think of a pithy way of explaining what this thing is. And the thing that came up for me, and I know this is really goofy, but when my wife and I were expecting our first child, somebody gave her the Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. And it was basically like, look, you're going to hear a lot of stuff, but here's what you need to know. And so this is sort of the Girlfriend's Guide to the Conservation Lands Network. All right. Everything that we're about to present today can be found at bayarealands.org. And in fact, if you want to go there now, that's fine. Kind of be ready to poke around yourself on the Explorer tool map. But here's our agenda. We've got a lot to go over. So we're going to spend the first 10 minutes giving you an overview of the CLN framework, kind of the structure of everything and why we did this project. The following 10 minutes, we're going to go kind of through the interactive map and the reporting functionality. So I'll kind of show you how to work with the map and how to run a report. And then we're going to go into kind of 3 tutorials. And actually, you know, to save time, we actually wove climate change. Climate change was going to be its own tutorial, but what we found when we went through this was that climate change was sort of woven through the land assessments and the fundraising tutorials. So it's kind of 2.5 tutorials. We'll spend about a half an hour on those. That's really the kind of the heart of the presentation or the webinar. And then we definitely want to have time for your questions. Love to answer them, get your suggestions. What worked really well in previous webinars was if you can chat your questions as we go. That way we can cover a lot of material, and then we'll go back and start answering them during the Q&A. And if we don't get to your question, then we can go back and kind of fill those out and put them in a Google Doc and you know, link that with the presentation itself. So chat your questions as you go. Okay, let's get started. So the Conservation Lands Network is not new. It's been a community, a Bay Area-wide effort since 2006. CLN 1.0 was launched in 2011. That was Nancy Schaefer and Ryan Brantafort and Stu Weiss, who's still the science advisor. They were the core team that really launched the CLN 1.0. and in 2011. And then we just got done updating it to 2.0 in November of last year, so about a year ago. But so who's involved now? We've got myself, Dr. Stu Weiss. We've got a 32-member steering committee of science and conservation practitioners from around the Bay Area. We have 8 different focus teams. We have a peer tester group, and then we have our amazing partners, Green Info Network, on the technology side. And in total, we've engaged over 140 volunteer experts and practitioners. So this is very much a community sort of based framework. And our geography is focused on the uplands of the Bay Area and the 10-county Bay Area at that. The Baylands we have kind of a complementary or a sister framework called the Baylands Habitat Goals Project. You can think of the Conservation Lands Network as the Uplands Habitat Goals Project. In fact, that was its original name. So why do we do this? Well, the Bay Area, why do we have all this sort of conservation planning? So the Bay Area is a recognized biodiversity hotspot, which means we have a lot of different plants and animals that call this place home. And many are endemic to our unique environment here. But we have a lot of people living in the Bay Area, and we've done quite a number on the habitats of the Bay Area. Probably no surprise to the folks on the call, climate change is set to sort of stress the ecosystem even more. And we are looking at adding about 2.1 million more people by 2040, according to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Planned Bay Area. So what are we trying to do here? It's really to create a community-based kind of inspiring vision that focuses our conservation efforts across the 10-county Bay Area. There's a lot of different conservation organizations, a lot of different recreation districts and water districts, resource conservation districts. And so what we also need is an accounting framework to track and communicate our aggregate process so that the Bay Area can speak with one voice, that we have a plan, we put our heads together, we have a plan, and we have specific goals that we're working toward to achieve an ultimate goal of conserving 2.5 million acres of priority land by 2050. And that's about half the Bay Area. And conservation here doesn't only mean buying land or buying conservation easements. Conserving really means reducing or eliminating the threat of conversion of habitat and fragmentation of habitat through really any means any creative means that we have in our kind of our creative tools that we have in our tool belt. That could mean policies that defend certain parts of the landscape until kind of permanent conservation can happen. But we don't want to just kind of go out there and conserve half the Bay Area willy-nilly. We really want to answer the question, which half? The half that we are going for, we want to make sure that has a sum total of the habitat types in the Bay Area that will house the sum total of the biodiversity, biodiversity that we have here in the Bay Area. And conservation planning as a discipline has given us the tools to do just that. So what does that look like in the Bay Area? Well, let's kind of look at the Bay Area through the lens of the Conservation Lands Network. You're looking at about 4.8 million acres of terrestrial land. About 1.5 million of those acres has been either cultivated or urbanized. It's kind of no longer natural habitat. So it leaves about 3.3 million acres of natural land. We have collectively conserved about 1.4 million acres of the Bay Area. So, which leaves 1.9 million acres of unprotected natural land. The Conservation Lands Network is this, again, this sort of a regional network that covers the habitats in appropriate amounts and as efficiently kind of configured as possible. And so the idea is those blue areas that you see on the map, and there's a couple of shades of blue there, I'll get into in a second, offer about 1.3 million acres of kind of strategic opportunities to add 1.1 million to get to our goal of 2.5 million acres. So that is the kind of 30,000 foot perspective of the CLN as a kind of a vision that we can all get behind. But I want to take a moment to kind of explain how the blue areas were selected, how the network was created. We use a time-tested methodology called the coarse filter, fine filter approach to conservation planning. The idea is that you start with a coarse filter map, habitats, vegetation types, and you start to prioritize based on those. But you know that certain biodiversity elements don't kind of map to vegetation types really well. So for instance, ponds are kind of notoriously undermapped in vegetation maps. Rookeries, spotted owl nests, those things don't necessarily kind of pop up. So what you need is another filter there to catch the bits that that fall through. And I'm using a graphic from Canada here. So moose aquatic feeding areas, not yet in the Bay Area. But what we do have here are kind of the habitat structures and ecosystems across the landscape. And the idea is that we want to meet most of the habitat requirements of most of the native species using a coarse kind of vegetation map. That coarse vegetation map is each one of those vegetation types are ranked by a vegetation focus team, a rank 1, 2, and 3. Rank 1s, I'll get into it in just a second. Well, I'll get into it right now. Rank 1s get a network goal of 90%, rank 2s 75%, and rank 3s 50%. The idea is that we want to make sure that within those blue areas, within the network, we have 90% of the rank 1s, 75 of the 2s, and 50 of the 3s. And that's kind of the geospatial configuration that we're telling the computer to help us out with. So examples of this, rank 1s will be, blue oak woodland in the Rushing River Valley, where they're really quite rare. They're not so rare over the mountain in Napa County. So they're actually a rank 2 in Napa County. So this, just as an example, old growth redwoods really anywhere are rank 1, maritime chaparral anywhere are rank 1, so on and so forth. So we map that across the whole Bay Area. We have over 1,700 fine filter conservation targets. So those were the coarse filter vegetation types. And then we have our fine filter. And some examples of those are, we go out and find actual pond dots, pond points. And we can also use other data sources to map large complex forests. These are just two examples of our fine filter targets. You can see here, I won't go through the list, but there's a lot of different data sets that we pull in as those fine filter targets to try to capture all of the different kind of types of biodiversity we have in the Bay Area. Okay, so how do we create the network itself? We start with 36 landscape units. We combine those with our vegetation types, and that's how we get our coarse filter conservation targets that are then each individually ranked by our vegetation focus team. It's kind of a lot of work, but they did it. Then we combine that with our fine filter conservation targets. And the rankings of the coarse and the fine filter are combined with our protected areas network and something you can think of as sort of a human impact cost layer. And those all go into a time-tested software package called MarkSan that goes and finds over millions and millions of iterations the network that achieves all of our goals, the 90, 75, and 50, and is in the most efficient sort of compact design possible, or almost possible. We get to kind of a near optimized network, and so that's how we do it. We do a couple of enhancements. One is, so here's sort of what the MarkSan software spits out here in the Santa Rosa area. Then we take urban data, rural residential data, and cultivated data. Sorry about the green. We want to keep green as sort of conserved land. But anyway, green right on this map is cultivated. And we clip those out of the network so that the network, the boundaries of the network are a little smarter in terms of what's actually on the ground in terms of land cover and land use. Two more key enhancements to the network. We wanted to add stream valleys, because stream valleys are so important. They're engines of biodiversity and are going to be extremely important for climate change. So we modeled all the stream valleys in the bay, across the Bay Area. And we made sure that we got sort of up to the upland fringe up across the stream valley, so that over time, the channel of the stream can kind of migrate laterally across its floodplain. And so we kind of added those in. Here's a close-up view of that modeling effort. You can see the floodplain in this map, and you can see how we've kind of gone up to the upland fringe. This is exactly the kind of the area that we want to make sure there's plenty of room for the river to do its thing. One more enhancement, we wanted to make sure that the network itself is actually connected. So we mapped these efficient pathways between the network kind of fragments where they've been fragmented. And we add those in as a separate category called areas that ensure a connected network. Okay, and that's where we arrive at this map. There's so much more that goes into the Conservation Lands Network. One other piece that's kind of a high-level prioritized data set is that you can tell that the Conservation Lands Network itself is kind of a polygon-based feature, and we do have stream valleys in there, but we wanted to kind of distinguish which of our stream corridors are perhaps more important from looking through a lens of a fish. And so we prioritized all the streams in the Bay Area as a priority 1, priority 2, or a priority 3. And priority 1 is presence of coho salmon and inland steelhead. Priority 2 is presence of inland native fish and coastal steelhead streams. And priority 3 is basically just any other stream. Because why? Because streams are so important. Okay, so all of this is packaged for your consumption in several formats. One is a downloadable report. Highly recommend that you take a look. A lot of information in there. The Explorer tool that I'm going to flash over to in just a second. And what you can produce using the Explorer tool, the conservation portfolio reports. These are customized reports for your area of interest. We have kind of a regional scale dashboard. You can kind of see how the different counties are doing across the different goals of the Conservation Lands Network. These are kind of high-level goals, not necessarily habitat goals. These are goals like, conserve the kind of the last remaining corridors and those kinds of things. And then finally, for your GIS folks out there, we have a fully kind of formatted GIS database and a ArcGIS map document to view all of this information through. But today we're going to focus on 2 and 3. Okay, one piece before I get started, just want to note that we have a feedback button on our on the Explorer tool, and just a plug, as you're playing, if you have feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, so before I get to our tutorials, I just want to go over 2. We're going to start at Bay Area lands.org. First thing you're going to do is click the Explorer tool. And you're going to, I won't take the time right now, but please take a look at this information here. This gives you some critical information about using the Explorer tool and a note about scale. I'm going to launch the Explorer tool. And the first thing you see is the Conservation Lands Network itself. And I encourage you to lay on top of that the Protected Lands database. And we're going to go ahead and just zoom into the East Bay to Mount Diablo area. And I just want to kind of show you right off the bat the kinds of things you can do. So we have our Conservation Lands Network tab right here. And here are those primary data sets, kind of the baked priority data sets. We've got our areas essential to conservation goals, areas important to conservation goals, areas that ensure a connected network, and then areas that contribute to conservation goals. And then we have our stream conservation targets as well. As you scroll down, you can start to play with a whole slew of other data sets. And I'm just going to highlight a couple right now. I'm just going to leave kind of the hunting and pecking to you. You can turn these off, and you can look at agricultural land. You can look at things like bicycle routes, critical habitat policies, and then also lands that are at risk from urban sprawl from the at-risk report. Just want to highlight for each one of these data sets, if you want to know their source, you just click on the I button and you can link directly to the source. There's also a little blurb that tells you about it. We've got our vegetation rarity as well. As you can see that there's some, the different classes there, wildland-urban interface. And we also have this climate science section here, where you can get information about landscape resilience, and we're going to go over in just a little bit, vegetation, drought vulnerability, several other things. Couple of bits about functionality. So you can click anywhere on the map, and you'll get this where you clicked summary. It gives you the CLN category. It gives you the county that you're in, the watershed that you're in, which is state assembly district, which state senate district, any protected lands that are in the area, whether it's a large landscape block, whether it's, if there are any stream conservation targets there, what kind of vegetation you clicked on, and any critical habitat that exists there as well. So this is a really neat kind of summary. Okay. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of let you guys poke around with the layers. But I want to show you how to create a report. So there's 4 different ways to create a report for your area of interest. You can drop a pin and set a radius. You can draw a line and set a buffer radius. You can draw a polygon and I double click to finish, or you can upload a shape. You can upload a KML, KMZ, a GeoJSON, or a zipped shape file. So this is if you're a GIS person or you have GIS staff, you can choose a file. I'm going to choose this sample area. This is the Tilton Ranch and the Tilton Baird property, combined property. I'll show you here in Coyote Valley. And this was just acquired earlier this month. It's a very exciting acquisition. Right off the bat, you get this kind of summary pie chart of the different types of land classes here. So we can see that 99 acres are converted, and of that conversion, there's 87 cultivated, and there is, what else is there? It's probably rural residential 10. This gives you kind of a little pie chart view of the property from a CLN land class standpoint. We also serve up the different kind of the top habitat goals. So right off the bat, this is a bit of a kind of a serpentine grasslands rock star. You can see that the total acres protection goal for serpentine grasslands here is 2,300 acres. About 1,200 have been protected, and this property alone would contribute to 352 acres if it were, well, now it is protected, but we're kind of pretending that it's something you're looking at before protection. So anyway, it gives you a little snapshot, but the real key here is if you want to download a full report. So we're going to have you register. I'm already registered, of course. Have you register here. It's a very simple process. It just helps us know what the kind of the traffic is. We don't keep any of your maps. We just, it's great for going back to our funders and say, hey, look, this is really being used. Here's the rate at which it's being used. So I can log in and I can download a report. I can call this, I can call it give it a title, and I'll download the report. In the interest of time, I've already downloaded the report. So we're going to go back to our, I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint presentation. And here's where the kind of the girlfriend's guide starts. The report is a PDF. And what I've done is I've pulled out chunks of the report and kind of marked it up for you. So everything you see in orange is sort of that kind of friendly guide to the conservation, these conservation portfolio reports, as we call them. In fact, I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, okay, so the report is ready. We would click to download it. Here it is. You get side-by-side maps. You get the pie chart again. You get the top habitat goals. And then we really get into the meat of the report. Now, I'm going to flash back over here. We're going to look at the report in terms of these two different kind of use cases, land assessment and fundraising. And what we've done is we've woven climate change through both of these so that we're kind of covering that content for you. So what do we mean by land assessment use cases? We're talking about kind of acquisition inquiry. We're talking about for community planners, zoning considerations, for land conservation advocacy groups or individuals. This is a tool to assess a piece of land that you're interested in. And for that purpose, the Explorer Conservation Portfolio Report provides a biodiversity inventory, kind of features on the land that you wouldn't normally know if you haven't been out there, landscape level ecology insights, connectivity, those kinds of things, and some stewardship considerations. So I'm going to take each one of these one by one and try to kind of illuminate what the CPR tells you. And we're going to use this Tilton Ranch, and it was just conserved earlier this month, and it is in the Sierra Azul landscape unit. And that's kind of those 36 geography, that's the organizing unit for the Conservation Lands Network, are these landscape units. All the priorities are kind of set at the landscape unit level. So let's look at the biodiversity inventory. So we're going to look at the coarse filter targets, the fine filter targets, the stream targets, species estimates for suitable habitats. Okay, so here's one of the most important tables that you find in the report. You're going to see the habitat targets sorted by rarity rank and then acreage. You can see the rarity rank and the acreage. Then you also get for the whole landscape unit what the total acres of each one of those vegetation types are for that in the landscape unit. So for instance, there's about 2,600 acres of serpentine grasslands in the Sierra Azul landscape unit. It's a rank 1, so we're going to multiply 2,500 or 2,600 by 90%, and we get 2323. Now, about 1,200 of those acres are already conserved, which leaves a gap of about 1,100 acres. Okay, so here's where we can translate this area of interest to the goal, to the overall kind of conservation goals. So this property alone would contribute 352 acres to the 1,150 acreage gap for the regional conservation goal. So if we look at that gap, this column right here, we'll see numbers, and then we get a 0. So since these habitat targets still require additional protection, that's that gap column, all of this acreage would go toward protection of these gaps. Now this one, conversely, California Bay, has already met and exceeded its protection goals. So it has a gap of 0. So none of the on-site acreage would be counted toward filling a gap. So that's the table. Now you go and do some math based on this property. We'll work on an enhancement where we do this step for you as well. But for instance, you know, the serpentine grasslands, as I mentioned, 352 divided by 1150 is 30%. So that's kind of a big whopping, you know, we by conserving this land, we get 30% toward our goal for this area for serpentine grassland. And if we look at these other areas, we're looking at almost 20% for valley oak, 20% for riparian mixed hardwood, 23% for warm grasslands. So this is a selling point, really, for this property. That there's a big bang for your buck from a habitat goals and the kind of the county framework standpoint. This is a kind of a rock star property for biodiversity alone. Let's look at some of the fine filter targets. There's an occurrence of a rare plant, a Dudleya. There's only 6 unprotected occurrences left in our goals. So this is kind of 1/6 of that of our goals. So that's getting us there a little bit more. We've got 2 ponds on the property. So this is just a good inventory of what's there that has kind of a conservation implication. So we've got our rarity ranks and then our contributions to regional conservation goals. Our stream targets. So there aren't any stream targets on the Tilton Ranch, so I just went a little bit to the east just to show you what comes up when you are when your area of interest does intersect with a priority stream. And as you can see, we list the length of miles, the priority, the name of the stream, and then the types of fish that and aquatic species that are found in that stream. So good kind of intel about what is going on the property that you can use for your assessment purposes. So if you're wondering, as many folks do when you're looking at a lot of these coastal watersheds, wondering if your area of interest is part of a coho recovery plan, here's a nice reference map for you. And the idea here is that you know, you go to the PDF and take a look and see if you're in the watershed. And then we're not going to redo those, the implications of being in a coho watershed. We're going to really point you to the recovery plans for the details. There's no need to rehash those. Okay, moving on, suitability habitat for species. We give you a list of possible species, it's just an estimate, but based on the habitat types there, here are birds, mammals, plants, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates that you may see out there. And I just underlined several species that are of specific concern. And we happen to know that bay checker spot is out there. Those serpentine grasslands are bay checker spot happy land. Next, let's move on to features on the land that the conservation portfolio reports give you. So we give you a neat chart of the land cover. Instead of looking at the natural land through the lens of the different habitats, which we already did using the coarse filter vegetation types, we give you the natural land in terms of the conservation land classes, Conservation Lands Network land classes. So how much of it is priority land, contributing land to those, contributing to goals, connectors, and then converted. So it's just a bunch of really good math and kind of a geoprocessing that you would normally have to pivot to a GIS analyst to do. Like, show me how much of the land is a priority for the CLN, and of those priorities, how much is essential and how much is important. So all this map is done. A take home here, 96% of this property is natural cover and 2/3 is high priority. So that's another neat selling point. We've got some more math for you, conservation status. We've got this metric of human impacts based on population density, distance to roads, and parcel density. So the flip side of the human impacts is what you can think of as kind of conservation suitability. So high impact, low suitability for conservation, low impact, high suitability for conservation. So if you're comparing two properties side by side, this is an interesting metric that you might look at. Slope, big consideration for kind of the development potential of land. So moderate to flat slopes are highly buildable. So these are very common slope break classes for use in determining how much of a property is sort of, without a lot of hurdles, fairly buildable. And so about 31%, a third of the property is pretty easy to build on in terms of slope. Elevation, just good to know what the elevation range is. We've done that math for you. Other examples of kind of land assessment, status, slope, and visibility. We've done a visibility analysis, and it shows that 40% of the property is highly visible. And what we mean by that is we dropped a point along every major road in the Bay Area and 1 point per 1,000 people in populated areas. And we did this visibility analysis to show which lands are visible from these points. And this is good for community character and just for aesthetics of a region. All right, landscape ecology insights. We've got connectivity and corridors for you. These are very important pieces of information. We have our Bay Area, critical linkages project that gives us linkages that are based on suitability for specific species. And then we have this landscape connectivity metric that sort of doesn't think specifically about species, but looks at just how easy is it to get across the landscape if you are an individual animal or a seed of a plant. And we call that permeability, how permeable is the landscape. And so the critical linkages, again, this property is right on a critical linkage that was identified for black-tailed deer and bobcat and badger and mountain lion. You can learn more about that project and download that report at bayarealands.org. And then there's this regional connectivity that shows kind of where there are really broad linkages, where there are few linkages left, and where there are kind of the last natural linkage in that area. And you can see that this property is actually mostly kind of few and last, and that's obviously created by the pinch point of San Jose and Morgan Hill. And okay, moving on to stewardship considerations. We already went through the species, so that bay checker spot and the ponds and the Dudleya, these are stewardship considerations when you have a special status species. And so what we'd like you to do is check out chapters 4 through 9 in the 1.0 report and the 2.0 report. And in there, we give you from our focus teams, threats and specific conservation actions to take a look at. So kind of planting a seed there, or putting a pin in that. But for the purposes of, one other seed to plant here is there's also the appendix from the CLN 2.0 report that goes species by species and gives you, pithy kind of habitat statements, and also notes and management issues from our different focus teams. Okay, one specific data set that we put together that has serious stewardship implications is this vegetation vulnerability to drought. And basically what this is an estimate of the proximity to the edge of a given stand of vegetation's comfort zone. So looking at all the different stands of each vegetation type, and you look at this metric of climatic water deficit, this climate variable of climatic water deficit, which is kind of a proxy for drought stress. And we find that some habitat stands are kind of well within their comfort zone for this climate variable. And then we find that some that are right on the edge. The idea here is if we get a little drier, those ones that are in the red zone, they're going to be likely the first to go, going from woody vegetation to shrubby to grassland. So here's the kind of profile for the different vegetation types of this property. And so the take home here is that this property contains several vegetation stands that may require extra consideration or effort, like maintaining or restoring hydrologic connectivity to these sites. So for instance, California Bay, it's in the red zone. You can see those on the map. Okay, other stewardship considerations, fire fuels management. We tell you about hazard, fire probability. and fire intensity. So if ignited, the property is expected to burn intensely, whether or not it's in the WUI. Flooding, is flooding expected to be a significant issue? If not on this property, you can see the zeros there. Now I want to get into fundraising with my, let's do a quick time check here. Okay, I think we're looking all right. So fundraising, we're really thinking of this through kind of biodiversity, conservation, and then the conservation co-benefits related to biodiversity. So things like agriculture, habitat enhancement and connectivity, resilience and climate adaptation, drinking water, and recreation. And in the parentheses, I've listed several funds, kind of funding sources that tie directly into these different co-benefits. And when you go into these, and maybe some of you are in development teams in your organizations, you know that there are certain eligibility requirements or certain things that these funds are looking for. And you need intel to be able to say, this property does a really good job in terms of connectivity and climate resilience and drinking water, or something like that. Where the state and other funding sources are moving more and more to a multi-benefit kind of portfolio approach to funding projects. So they kind of want to see where these things stack up. And so we give you information that helps you do that. And I also want to just mention that there's a lot of intersections with state objectives in these conservation portfolio reports. I won't go into these, but you know, if you dig, you'll be able to say something about each one of these 8 different objectives. You'll be able to say something about these 3 different objectives from MPC. These are from the Priority Conservation Area Program of MPC, and I encourage you to go to bayareagreenprint.org, which is really tailored. It uses the Conservation Lands Network data, and it adds a lot of other things, and it's really tailored for the Priority Conservation Areas program. Okay, fundraising example. I want to tell this story briefly through the lens of the Gun Ranch 2 property. It's 5,200 acres. It's the Lake Berryessa that was conserved earlier this year by the Land Trust of Napa County and others. It's in the Blue Ridge Berryessa Landscape Unit. And so if we looked at it from like a habitat enhancement and connectivity standpoint, we already have gone over that, you know, that you can say that this property is actually an essential part of a priority network. So we can say that with confidence. We can go through the course and find filter targets and goals. We can say things like 24% of the remaining goals for blue oak woodland in the area exist on this property. We can say things like this is part of a last remaining linkage. We can say things like this is a regionally significant core habitat. And in addition, we can say things about recreation and agriculture. So for instance, there's 2 accessible recreation units within a mile of this property. So there's possibilities for trail connections. There's a profile of different farmland priority classes. So 99% of this property is suitable for grazing. Cultivation suitability, this is not particularly suitable for cultivation. The Story Soil Index is a really neat index of how good the soil is for cultivation. It's good to know. It's good to know that this isn't necessarily a place to, you know, grow food, but it is it's a great place to graze livestock. How about climate mitigation and adaptation and drinking water supply? Couple of things on the adaptation side. We show you how many metric tons of greenhouse gas equivalent is stored in the above ground vegetation. And we also compare that with all the other areas in the Bay Area. And we can say things like, this property contains considerable stored above ground carbon. However, the property is not significantly carbon dense comparatively to other places. So it's just good intel again for, you know, kind of how much carbon is stored on the property. Something we expect to see when so much of the land is grazing. It's kind of a rangeland. Again, this is above ground. It doesn't take into consideration soil. This is nearly the whole property is part of a municipal drinking water supply. Really good information for conserving drinking water supply, Prop 1, and other funding sources. resilience. Everybody's talking about resilience. The Nature Conservancy put together the Resilient Landscapes Program. The California TNC office did a really great resilience study. It's basically just an index of microhabitat options. So it's looking at how diverse the landscape is. This is the nature stage kind of approach, where we're not necessarily trying to predict what the climate's going to be or what habitats are going to be where, but we're just saying the more diverse and the more kind of wet an area is, the greater the chance that the property is going to continue to provide similar habitat. And we provide this sort of profile of all the resilience in the Bay Area and kind of where your property sits amongst that profile. So this particular property is among the most resilient in the region. So one more piece on this is just that, you know, what's the kind of aha, like what do you do here? Or maybe the so what. The first is you want to investigate why you got the result that you got. So in this case, it's above average to far above average resilience. And that's because it has a diverse topography and it's also connected to other diverse landscapes. That's part of the metric determination. And if you're in a highly resilient area, you want to work to keep it that way. And if you're in a less resilient area, you want to make sure that you are doing things like removing barriers to connectivity, improving hydrologic connectivity, and those kinds of things. You can actually kind of maintain or improve the resilience of an area. I want to just highlight also for funding purposes, I mentioned before that where you can click anywhere on the map, you can find out whether it's a priority conservation area for MTC, ABAG's PCA program. There's a whole slew of policies that are mapped in the Explorer tool. You can click on and find those, find out which ones are applicable to your property. Things like critical habitat, Baylands policies, protected habitat policies, or watershed policies. Anything that these things can really help bolster your the story you tell about your property. And finally, one of the big kind of head scratchers, or just a kind of not a head scratcher, but I know that if you're putting together a proposal for a property, often you're asked for the coordinates of the property, and you typically have to pivot to a GIS person or go up to some other site. Well, we've embedded the coordinates of your area for you, so you can just slide that right in. Okay, so with that, let's hear from you. 2 minutes over, I apologize. And I am looking at the chat now, and I'm not seeing any questions so far. Hopefully that was, I know that the pace was very rapid, but we are recording, and you can always go back and read the recording. But unless I'm not seeing the, oh, here we go. Great. Okay, so is it possible to isolate county boundaries via the tool, i.e. without uploading a shapefile? No, not currently. That's a great question. That's something that we would actually like to, in addition to the PDF, we'd like to have a full kind of HTML version of the reporting tool. And in that way, we would have these sort of canned reports that you could do at the county level. So yeah, you'd need a shapefile or a KML to run a county-wide report. Is it possible to isolate, oh wait, sorry, got it. That's the same question. Well, cool. Well, I have a couple, just feel free to chat in. I would love to hear, if you don't mind just typing in what you, what's the top application that you see for using the CLN? Was any of what I just presented sort of in your wheelhouse? I'd love to hear it, and the chat's a great place to throw it. I see a question. Do you have an overlay of designated priority conservation areas? Yes. So if you go into the Explorer tool, and you go to other conservation layers and expand that, you can go to priority conservation areas and you get a look. So you can click anywhere in these hatched purple areas, and this is the North Livermore, South Livermore Valley priority conservation area, so on and so forth. So the answer is yes to that. Let's see here. Is there any data that is not in the CLN? Great question. Thank you for asking. Yes, there's a lot of data that's not in the CLN. I'd actually love to take the opportunity to let you all know about the Bay Area Green Print, which is kind of an aggregator of information. It vacuums up the conservation lands network priorities, so the network itself and the stream targets, but it also combines information about urban greening and disadvantaged communities, about, let's see here, more about recreation, several other kind of what we call kind of nature's values and benefits. I see Annie just chatted the Bay Area Green Print site. In a couple of weeks, on the 28th, there's going to be a Green Print webinar similar to this one. That's basically like an overview, and we'll go through some new functionality. You can think of the Green Print as being it's tailored toward community and transportation kind of infrastructure planners, whereas the Conservation Lands Network is tailored more toward open space and kind of natural and working lands conservation. We go deeper into the biodiversity elements than the Green Print does. But they're very complementary. So I encourage you to go to also to the website that Annie just chatted in. Thank you, Annie, for upcoming events, which has that webinar and then a follow-on webinar for the Green Print, what we call the Mitigation Wizard component of the Green Print. And that is tailored for folks who are in kind of the regulatory frame, where you're looking at directing mitigation toward the kind of hot spots of opportunities. Where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of funneling mitigation dollars toward? So I encourage you to take a look at and register for those two. We're kind of bundling these three. They're all about kind of 2 weeks apart. Let's see here. Stu, I'm going to lean on you in the waning minutes here to see what did I leave out. Any additional thoughts while people are still chatting in questions?
Wow. Yeah, there's so much in there that we've tried to make accessible to people. One of the data sources that's really important that we actually don't have a lot of good data on. We're using the California Natural Diversity Database for species occurrences. And as we know, that is notoriously incomplete, especially on private lands. So it's important to look on, say, adjacent protected lands to see what listed or rare species show up on those areas, because it's not going to show up on a lot of private lands. So
right.
Make that clear. Yeah, I just urge people to play around, be creative. One of the cool functionalities that Tom can show, I think, is you can save a snapshot of your map. So
that's right. Thank you for bringing that up, actually. So if you format a map and you say to a colleague, hey, check out this map, Here's that area of, here's the protected lands and the headwater sources and some stream valley information. You can copy this whole link and send that link to somebody else, and just type that in, and it'll go right back to where you were, and it'll load all the layers that you had open up there. So thank you for bringing that up, Stu. And with that, let's see here. One last question. Interested in using this tool to map least conflict priority areas for commercial solar development. Once we've selected criteria and identified priority areas, is it possible to export those areas as shapefiles? Not right now, but that's another enhancement we're going to work on, because it's really nice to be able to capture your the line work that you draw in the tool. So thank you for asking that, and great use of the tool, kind of comparing different.
Sorry, Tom. When you draw a polygon on there, you can save that polygon as a shapefile.
Actually, you can't. Stu, with the new guts, we need to add it in. But we're a little over time. Just want to thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Share this with friends and colleagues, and please keep in touch. Thank you all.